For most account managers, the CFO is a black box. You know they matter. You know they're involved in decisions about budget, renewals, and vendor selection. But you don't really know how they think, what they're tracking, or what makes them trust you or stop trusting you. My guest today is Jacques Sciammas. Jacques has held the CFO and COO role at companies including Charles Schwab, McGraw-Hill, and Standard & Poor's. Today, he runs Selling to Executives, where he coaches B2B sales teams on how to engage the C-suite. In this conversation, we get into what the CFO is actually evaluating when they approve a deal and what they expect after it's signed. Why we don't have the budget almost never means what you think it does. Why discounting signals that you haven't demonstrated value and what to do instead, and what CFOs mean when they say they hate vendor churn. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Account Management Secrets. If you're an account manager, you're the one keeping the business running. You own the client relationships, drive the revenue, and solve the tough problems for your customers. Most companies don't give account managers the training or recognition they deserve. That's what you'll get here on the Account Management Secrets podcast. In this show, we cover exactly what you need to succeed. If that sounds like what you've been looking for, hit subscribe and let's get into it. Hey, Jacques, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here, Alex.
I've been very interested in talking to you because you are someone with deep experience as a CFO, Chief Financial Officer. And for those of us in the account management and post-sales arena, we always know that the CFO is a serious person inside of our customers, and someone we need to maintain a relationship or develop a relationship with. And at the same time, for a lot of us, the CFO is a bit of a black box. Like we don't truly understand what is it that the CFO does, how do they think, what is their role in the business. And so I would love to just start there and get your perspective on what is the role of the CFO, and specifically here in 2026, what's the role of the CFO that we need to be aware of?
Well, let's summarize by just saying the role of the CFO is to make sure that the CEO succeeds and that the shareholders win and that the customers are happy. So he or she has a very broad responsibility, and they don't have a P&L, so to speak. Don't have an operation, so to speak, but they're accountable for everything in the company. The buck stops at the CEO. And if you have to look at somebody else, it's a CFO. It's the right-hand person of the CEO.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we will often just think of the CFO in much more simple terms. Like the CFO is the person with the money, right? But they're not the person with the money. They're the financial partner of the business to make sure, like you're saying, the CEO succeeds and the shareholders succeed, and we're delivering what we're supposed to be doing. So it's a much more strategic and important role than than you would think if you just said, well, they're the people with the money. They're the guys who control the purse strings, so to speak, right?
Yeah. So it's true that we do manage the money and allocate the money and approve the various proposals, but that's a small portion. The big portion is really to make sure that our strategy is aligned with what we need to do and with what the shareholders want us to do, and that we execute on that strategy and work with all the operating heads and the CEO and the board to make that happen smoothly, efficiently, so that everybody's happy. Kumbaya.
And how do you think about the internal relationships that you need to develop and to maintain? So you have internal customers, if you will, for the CFO unit. How do you think about that?
So think of the C-suite as having the CEO, the CFO, the COO, the heads of the different divisions, the CIO, CTO, CDO, if it's digital or data, and CMO or CRO, pick your CXO. And all these people make up the C-suite, and the CFO has to work with all these executives in order to have the engine go smoothly.
And to that extent, Which one's the most important besides the CEO? Obviously, the CEO is most important. Is it mainly operational, like on the inside of the business?
Uh, it's a broad question, which means if you were to say who's the most important executive, yeah, it's the CEO because the buck stops there. Who comes next? The CFO is the fault person. So if something is wrong, it's the CFO. If you look at who else, if you got a huge division and you got an MD or a CEO of that division, that's probably the next person. And I'm answering the question in the sense of who is the most likely person to succeed the CEO and who's the most likely person to take the blame if something goes wrong with the CEO. And
Yeah.
it could be the same person, it could be two different people.
Now, tell us about how we think about the concept of selling to the CFO and selling to executives. And, you know, just so that you're aware of the use cases that are very common for our listeners, our listeners, the folks who listen to the Account Management Secrets, they're going to be account managers, customer success leaders, and they spend a lot of time, working with existing customers. So sales is already made the initial sale. We're 1 or 2 years into the contract and we're delivering on stuff. And the account manager's job is to make sure that we're doing what we said we were going to do. The customer is getting successful. And often it also involves negotiating things like renewals or further contracts, upsells and cross sells and stuff like that. And therefore, we want the account managers to be really fluent and conversant in the language of the CFO and very comfortable talking to a CFO. How do you think about this from a selling perspective and from a buying perspective? Like what do we need to be aware of?
Okay, so just for context for the audience, I used to chair the capital committee. This is the committee made up of the executives that decide on strategic investments. So it had everybody at the C-suite involved in the decision making. And when there is proposal before it's approved, everybody gets involved. It's a village. So it's a committee, really a lot of think of it business people. They think, is it good for the company? Does it make sense? And who is the best vendor to provide that? And that's we go through this process. Post sale, a lot of salespeople think the deal is done once you get the signature. In reality, from our point of view, the deal is done once we see the value that's been promised to us. So similarly, the conversation, if has to be business, it has to be outcome before the deal, and it has to be like that after the deal. It can't go back to that's how the product works, or this is how you use the equipment. And they default on that, the salespeople and the tech people, because it's a natural comfort zone. But from our end, we really want the relationship with the account management to be strategic rather than operational. So we want them to look out, is it really accomplishing what it's supposed to do in terms of increasing revenue, reducing costs, reducing risk, all of the above, and all the way up to any renewal or expansion. That's what we're focusing on. We're focusing on, are you working with us or are you working to get the next deal? And they're related, but one has to come, you're working with us to get our value first.
When you say that you want the people you're working with to be strategic and not just tactical vendors, not just in the weeds, that of course mirrors exactly what so many of us hear. Like on the account management side, everyone's told to go be more strategic, and I know that that's something that lands. People understand. They hear the words, and then they think, how do I do this? If I get in front of the CFO, maybe there's a feeling of a little bit of a power imbalance. Maybe it feels like, oh, this is a very senior person and I'm just down here and it's hard for me to be strategic. What do you really mean? Like, how do we actually tick that box for you? What is it that makes you say, yes, this person is strategic, they're helping us on important stuff, they're not just being tactical? How do you view that lens?
One easy way to do it, quote unquote, easy, nothing is easy, is
Yeah.
to put yourself in my shoes. So if I am the head of the operation and you basically sold something to me that helps my business, and you said it was going to do this to my business, put yourself in my shoes. Is it doing what you said it's going to do? Short term and long term, very important. And if not, why not? And how do you help me get it there? So put yourself in my shoes so you figure out my pain, my goal, and how to solve it and how to get to where I need to go. So being strategic doesn't mean you have to look out 10 years out, especially in this technology world, but it has to really be, it's a mindset. You're not really thinking of the products anymore. You're not thinking of anything physical. You're thinking of the strategy. You're thinking of what do I need to accomplish for us to get value? Value relating to accomplishing the operational and financial KPIs that were really proposed when we basically approved the deal, because that's how it's going to be measured.
And what's the best way to go about that? So first, your first meeting with a vendor, your first meeting with a vendor, uh, what do you want them to show up with? How do you want them to behave? What kind of questions do you like? What kind of questions do you despise? What's the best way to for someone to establish a meaningful relationship with a CFO?
Pre-sale or post-sale?
Either, either.
Okay. So pre-sale, you have to basically establish credibility, which means you got to know my business, you got to know my challenges, you got to know what else is in the industry that has helped others in my companies like mine. And you got to basically share them with me and see if it's applicable to me. So when it's anybody who's trying to sell us something, we're looking at, is it relevant and is it valuable and are you the best? So why invest? Why you? Why now comes in also. So those are going to be the question. And the way to basically, before the deal, the way to convince us is to convince us that you really understand our business, our role, our function, and that you have the tools and the insights that we don't have sometimes because you worked with a lot of other companies and you've done stuff and we don't know what you've done and what the results are. So the more convinced we are that this is going to work for us, the more we'll be willing to sign the deal. Now, post-sale, once we sign the deal, it's not over. It's just beginning. Now, as I mentioned, put yourself in my shoes. If I pushed for that deal to be done as CFO, I'm on the hook now. Yeah, my CEO is on my back. My board is on my back, which means you can't leave me alone because you're never going to get any business from me again. You got to basically help me make sure that the execution delivers what execution said. You basically have to work with me and my people, the operation, the technical, the financial. You have to work with everybody inside, across, up and down in order for us to be successful. And I mean us because you sold me that and I'm responsible directly or indirectly. So just get into everybody's shoes and see what needs to be done to make it successful. Have milestones. You know, sure, people know QBRs and everything, but it's a little more than just QBR. It's like, what do we need to do to make sure it moves smoothly and fast and correctly?
On that point, what is the and I know it's going to depend based on complexity of the project and where we are in the cycle and so on, but broadly speaking, what are your thoughts about the cadence or the rhythm for coming back to the CFO or coming back to the executive? And here's the issue. On the post sale side, everyone is always told to maintain very good engagement and to have high level relationships. And then they also say, but how can I do that if I don't have a meaningful update? I don't want to just be quote unquote checking in, with someone and not adding value throughout. And we also have this issue where, if you try to do too many calls and meetings and QBRs and so on, eventually people don't go to them. Like they're not so useful anymore. So what are your thoughts? What have you seen work well there?
Well, the answer before the sale and after the sale is similar. I
Okay.
don't want you to come to me unless you have something of value to me. Information, insight, update. I don't want you to check with me because it's good to talk to the client, CFO. I'll throw you out of the office. I want I want you to come in to me when you need me and you give me something that I need. It's very clear. There's a problem with the project. There's something that slows it down that I can accelerate, help. Yes, come to me. There's an update that I don't know about for some reason. Yes, give me a quick update. But don't come to me to say hello and is there anything that you want to talk about? Because that you lose credibility right away, and you probably will never see me again.
Right. So don't show up and ask you what keeps you up at night.
Yeah, I think I think my boss and I once threw somebody out when they asked that question, a senior account exec. They said, "Oh, we want to know what keeps you up at night." I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, nothing's going to keep us out at night. Bye."
Yeah, that's not the way to do discovery. Tell us about how the CFO works as a partner to other C-suites during a project. So, for example, you just talked there, like there are times when the CFO is going to be the buyer or the main customer. There's also times when you're simply supporting someone else who's doing a project. Like if you're implementing a CRM system, for example, maybe the CRO and the COO are your internal clients and you're supporting them. How do you think about those relationships when it comes to shaping decisions?
I would guess about 80% of the time it relates to other executives rather than just us. We basically oversee and manage. So we do have audits. We do have seeing where are the milestones, are we reaching them? This is an update, both financial and operational. We get involved in these projects, if they're of size or strategic importance. So we'll always get involved in that. In terms of the working with the internal people, we also have a lot of meetings without the vendors, of course, to see how things are going and are we on the right track to make it happen. So we continuously have internal communication with and without vendors. And you need to help us in terms of if we're not covering something that we should, you need to bring it up to us. You need to challenge us. We're not experts, for example, in technology. If you sold us a technology solution, even maybe my CIO or CTO team is not as familiar as you are as the vendor. So we need this. I don't mean we need to be told what to do, but we need somebody to help us basically succeed. So common and frequent interactions, but interactions with a purpose.
Yeah.
Not meetings. We never had, when I was CFO, we never had, let's have a stand-in monthly meeting, because what's the point? Tell me what you want to accomplish. Same thing with the vendors. They need to basically, what is the value of their presence in a meeting? What is the value of the presence in terms of the relationship, and what are you doing for me lately, type of thing.
So let's explore this a little bit further. So let's say that we'll use the technology vendor example. The vendor is selling into the CRO and maybe the sales operations team, and the COO might be partially involved and stuff like that. How do you, as the CFO, start pushing and guiding and leading with your internal customers on things like resource allocation, timing, budget? Did we hit this goal? Did we get the ROI that we're looking for? Because for us in the post-sale world, a lot of that we don't see those conversations, like you're saying, they happen without us in the room, but we want to prep for them. We want to be aware of them. And so, to what extent are you putting controls on the project? Are you putting systems of inspection around the project and then going back to people? The reason that this is important is because one of the big KPIs for account management and customer success teams is, did the customer reach their goals and are they going to renew with us? And sometimes you know where you are and sometimes you don't know where you are. So how does it look on the inside when you're having that conversation?
So if it's a large project or a strategic project, we will have internal follow-ups. Let's say if it's the CRO, we're going to meet with him or her on a continuous basis. It could be once a month, depending what's right for the project. So we're going to have these internal meetings to make sure that we're on track in terms of spending and in terms of results. That's one. If something is not on track, hopefully the account manager knows about it. They need to be close to not only the CFO, but the head of the operation where it impacts the most. So they need to be aligned. They shouldn't hear about it from the client secondhand. They should be right in the middle of it. Okay, that's one. So we do our internal check and internal follow-up. And then we really need to work with the vendors to make sure that they can do anything they can in order for it to prevent problems and to accelerate results. I know it sounds silly, but that's really important to us to know that we have a hand-holding person who can help us move before we fall.
One of the things that I'm always surprised by is when customers go through the effort of ripping out a solution and changing vendors. And on the reverse side, this is called churn, right? So churn is when a customer decides not to continue working with you. What people don't understand about churn is the amount of effort it takes for the client. They have to have stood up an entire project. They ran it for, maybe multiple years. They spent a lot of money on it. And then they have to turn around and say, boy, this isn't working for us. Not only do we not see any value in fixing it, we're going to scrap the entire thing, start the whole project over again, maybe have an internal discussion about was our strategy right? And so incur quite a lot of costs, both time costs and money costs, to fix this. I would guess that as a CFO, you're looking at this and you're really pushing the project sponsor to say, are you sure we can't get what we're looking for here? How else could we be creative in getting to our results? Because if you got to start over, it's a big loss for everybody.
Yeah, we don't like, basically, salespeople should realize we hate churn. We hate churn. I'm talking about with vendors, not just our customers. Of course, we don't like it our customers, but we hate it with our vendors because, as you point out, it's very expensive and it's resource people, a lot of resources are taken. And also, you may be aware that when we churn, quite often we have big write-offs, the stuff that we haven't fully depreciated. It's as if it's a big loss out of the pocket. We look bad because that hits our P&L and that hits our APS. So we don't like churn. For churn to happen, very bluntly, I got to be unhappy with the vendor and with the project, unhappy with the implementation, unhappy with the results. It's something bad to the vendor, not just to us. We're very unhappy, but we're paying the price. And we'll try to do anything to avoid churn. We're on the side of the vendor all the way through till they drop us, of course, and they don't do what they're supposed to do.
That is I want everyone who's listening to this episode, if you're listening to this, as long as you're not driving, pause, go back 1 minute and listen to what Jacques said again. So what I heard from you there is you don't want churn any more than the vendor does because it's a huge waste. Yeah. You hate churn. It's a huge waste of time and resources. And it takes a lot. I mean, this is obviously for strategic projects. If it's some small project, it doesn't make a big deal. So on strategic projects, everybody feels bad when the product doesn't succeed and there's a churn situation. Tell us, I want to hear an example. If you have an example in your head of tell us about a project that was very close to churn that turned around, or tell us about something that got saved, or tell us when you almost got to the breaking point with someone and what happened for that to get right-sided.
Well, I can think of one project when I was at Schwab, Charles Schwab, the financial services firm. Okay. And we had worked with one vendor to implement a solution at the branch network, all our branches, a productivity, I'll call it a productivity solution. And
that sounds like a big deal. Sounds like a huge project.
Yeah, because we had 500 branches across the US, some small, some big. And it was intended to give us some productivity benefits in terms of more time of the branch employees to do things they like to do, like gathering assets and working with the clients on the relationships and stuff, rather than stuff like customer service and transactions. So stuff that they like to do, and it was supposed to be better for them, better for us, for the company, because it was basically productivity, saving time, saving money. And with the vendor, they basically sold us the deal, and everything looked good on paper. And then when we went to phase one of the project, we saw that it didn't work as well with the smaller branches as it did with the big branches. We had different sizes. And from the vendor point of view, they thought it was okay, because on a cumulative basis, if you add up the whole ROI of the project, it looked good. The small branches were suffering. The big branches were doing fine. And they figured we're happy. They didn't check with us that we're not happy with the small branches, because we have a lot of the branch managers and the regional VPs of the small branches on our back. And they didn't take it as seriously, even though we did mention it to them. They didn't take it as seriously. They said top down is fine. And they almost lost the deal. In other words, signed it. We could have stopped it and done something else. And eventually the EVP got involved on the vendor side, and we had a come to Jesus talk. And they basically fixed it. And they didn't discriminate the small to big. They realized it's the same client. You got to take care of the client, not the size of the branch. And that saved it. But it wasn't obvious earlier on, because we had a lot of branch managers that were not happy with the results they were getting. It was basically costing them money and not getting results. Just the opposite of what they said they were going to do.
And so is the issue that the you felt like the vendor wasn't listening, they weren't paying attention to the data?
They were looking at it differently than how we look at it. We look at it, every branch was important. They were looking at it, well, on average, everything is okay. So they didn't do what I suggested people to do in the beginning. Put yourself in the shoes of the customer, which meant not only the shoes of the CFO, me, the shoes of the head of operation, but the shoes of the branch manager. Put yourself in everybody's shoes. See who is unhappy, and that person is the person who can kill your deal, whether it's a renewal or expansion. Make sure that you're taking care of them.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. When I hear that story, I think that maybe they didn't go through a value defining exercise to say, what does value actually look like at all these different levels? Because they were making an assumption about how a certain branch was behaving, or a certain group of people were behaving, or were going to get results, without saying, well, what does good look like? And do we all together agree on what the metrics of success are going to be?
Yeah, and they probably also assume that it's not a collaborative decision on things like that after the sale. It still is, before and after, which means it's not going to be just the head of the branches and the CFO who will decide. It will be people who work with them and for them, and who they work for, who basically are going to say, hey, there's a problem here, and we need to fix it, and we're not happy with the vendor, so we're not going to renew them. That's going to happen. You got to basically assume that you've got to always assume, from a CFO perspective, we always look at worst case scenario. We don't want the worst case, but we have to think, where's the worst case scenario? We try to prevent it. And the vendor should do the same thing. Who in this suite of people working for the company, the client, can be somebody who can block us, who can be unhappy, who cannot gain our trust. And you need to cover them all.
So what's the best way to get the CFO or the finance team on your side if you're a vendor?
Best way to get on my side, get the results that you said you'll get, and make sure you know what results we want to get. And if there's any issue, any problem, heads up real early, transparent, big picture, challenges, honest. Integrity is key. Mistakes happen and things may not work out, but we want to work together to solve them. We're on the same team.
One of the things that I've heard before, and that we've discussed on this podcast, is our discussions around like how much value you need to show the customer. And what, because during the sale, during the pre-sales, everyone will walk in with these fancy ROI models and they'll say, you're going to make, 150% back in 3 weeks and you're going to this, that, and the other. And all these crazy numbers. And then you get into it. And of course, reality happens and some things work and some things don't. And some things are fast and slow, et cetera. I've always said that, you've got to have real clear alignment between what you think the value is, what your customers thinks value is, and make sure you're both really clear on that stuff. And I had someone on the podcast a while ago who said, his data had showed, what happens if things don't go all that well, because the natural instinct for me as an account manager, if things aren't going well, will be to maybe I don't lead with it in the meeting. Maybe it's not the first thing I'm talking about. But he was saying you build so much trust when you say, hey, look, I know we said we were going to be at, 10. Right now we're at 2. Here's our path to get there. Or, you might say, we're actually not, this is really not working right now, but here's what we're going to do about it. And what I learned from that is that the transparency and the integrity point to what you were just saying really matters, because now, first of all, the CFO, you realize when you bought this thing, it's not going to be magic. It's not going to be automatic. It's not going to be tomorrow. There's a lot of moving parts to make this a success. And if I show up and I'm kind of burying the data or not sharing it with you or reluctant to give it to you, that's going to give you a certain impression versus saying, no, here's where we are and we're on track or off track, but here's what we're doing about it. Here's what we need from you, and make it like a truly collaborative thing. That presumably gets you to show up in a different posture. Is that right?
Yes. And even before the sale, before we sign, we really would like the salesperson to tell us this can go wrong and this has gone wrong and this is what happened and that's how we took care of it. The more transparent and honest you are with us, the more we want to work with you. If you hide anything, you're done. I mean, if we ever catch you on it, you're done. And most likely we'll catch you on it. We'll do our due diligence. And if it's something that you didn't disclose, you're also done. Maybe we're going to take a penalty to cancel this contract, but you're not going to get another one again. So I always say, treat the client with total openness, total honesty. Tell them everything that could go wrong. Okay? Just don't let it go wrong. Yeah, I will trust somebody who comes into me and say, look, you may get a 30% ROI, you may get an 80% ROI. We do not know because it's a new technology, for example. But we're going to monitor it and keep you updated and do the things we need to do to get closer to the 80 than the 30. But don't be shocked if you go to the 30. It can happen. And then I won't have any negative surprise. And I'll be very happy when it goes to 80 or close to it. So be as honest as possible. We had cases where, deals were lost because people didn't tell us that there was an implementation problem with this other client, and they never disclosed it. What's wrong with disclosing that it didn't work well? Because we're going to find out about it. And of course, they never got the deal because we didn't trust them. So always make sure the client wants to trust you. And the best way to trust you is to basically be open, honest, and big picture.
Fantastic. Jacques, I wanna end on the topic of negotiation, discounting, stuff like this. So many people, they default to like, oh, finance is going to come and twist my arm and try to get a discount of some kind. And there's all these games that go back and forth with pricing. What I've heard from you in this conversation is you care about the value and the results. And I presume you don't have a lot of time for these sort of games if they're not directly linked to value and to results. How do you think about and how would you approach discounting, negotiations, what's important, during these deals? Because you said yourself, if you can manage my risk, that's really, really valuable. But everyone comes in and they just expect, oh, I'm going to discount whatever, 5%, 10%, whatever the thing is, they kind of expect that to happen. But I'm hearing something different from you.
Very much. And I tell, as you probably know, I work with strategic sales teams to help them win deals at the C-suite. And I work with probably 3 dozen of the high-tech companies and other B2B companies. And I tell them, never discount. Once you discount, you basically have not shown the true value that you're providing, which basically saying, yeah, I didn't convince you, so I got to give you more. And the only way I give you more is reducing the price. To me, if I have a salesperson that discounts, I'm going to double check the value. Means there's something wrong. Okay. So do not discount. The time you're going to basically take to discount something, take that time to demonstrate the value. You think of it as an iceberg, you haven't shown the whole bottom of the iceberg or a piece of it. That's what I want to see. And you're right, when it comes to risk, one deal, one of the board members said, can anything go wrong once we go live on this? And the answer was 99.99% nothing will go wrong. You can guess what happened.
Something went
we
wrong.
didn't launch for 6 months, and it cost us a huge amount of money to defer it that long. But we weren't going to take that risk. So risk is the worst thing that can happen to us, of course, depending what kind of risk, but mitigating risk is very, very helpful. And if you're a salesperson saying this is going to reduce the risk here, that's a lot worth much more than a discount. So discount is really, if you're talking about a commodity that you can buy everywhere, that there's nothing to talk about hidden value, then sure, we're going to send it to procurement. They're going to get the best price, but you don't need us. We get procurement very competent.
All right, so I said that's where I wanted to end, but I actually have one more question because based on what you were saying, which is, so how do I want to phrase this? I want to phrase this as a lot of times the internal people within your company don't know how to go ask the CFO for money for a project, and they might be reluctant, and they say, oh, we don't have the budget for this. Even if it's something important, they get called on. They don't know how to navigate. They don't know how to ask. They don't know how to make the business case. They don't know your phone number or how to find the CFO. Maybe they're nervous about it. They say, well, it wasn't in my original budget, so I'm not going to ask. But you're charged, you said this at the beginning, you're charged with making the business successful and helping everybody win. And to that extent, when new things come that are going to increase your likelihood of winning as the CFO, you want to go do them. What is your advice? How do you coach, maybe not necessarily the C-suite, but people, below the VPs and so on, who want to go do stuff? How do you coach them to come for you and make a business case for something?
Okay, let's start off with something you said relating to we don't have a budget. Anybody who tells the vendor we don't have a budget, or an internal person who doesn't have a budget, that's another way of saying we're not convinced of the value you're telling us. There's no such thing. If you're talking to the wrong level of executive, because we at the C-suite, the budget is always there. This is an ongoing company. It's not going to end at December 31. So we can create budget, planned, unplanned, we make it happen. If it's valuable enough, we make it happen. We'll display something if we had to. But most of the companies are cash rich and can find budget, number one. So when you hear we don't have a budget, think differently about how you communicated the value. Number two, what you want to do internally or externally, you want to make sure you communicated the value of the project. To me, it has to be, one of my priorities in terms of company priorities. It has to be important enough, and you have to convince me that it's got low risk, high return. I know it sounds like, sure, Santa Claus is here. Yes, we are looking for Christmas gifts. But, so there's no reason why you should not come to me or to another C-suite member if you have a good proposal. You talk about being shy to go to a senior level. I wrote an article the other day, about maybe a year ago, that basically said, I love salespeople. And the idea is a lot of the vendors they know their products, their solutions, their services. They know how they can help others. I don't research all the company's solutions. So I don't know. So who has the advantage? They know, I don't know. If they know my issues, my problems, and match them to how they can help me, they have the whole story. So they had a big advantage, and I want to listen to them until I sign their free resource on top of it. So don't be shy. Go, but make sure you have your story tight. And I'll be the first one to push for it and champion it.
There's been some real gems here. This is great. So we learned the we hate vendor churn, which I think is fantastic. We learned don't be shy and don't accept if your customer tells you they don't have a budget. Listen to what Jacques just said. It means you're not talking to the right person, and it means that you may not have shown value. And so figure out how to go communicate that. Well, Jacques Sciammas, thank you so much for being here. This is really fun. I appreciate the insights on how a CFO thinks. I really appreciate you being here with us.
Alex, thank you very much. It's a pleasure. You have some great podcasts. So congrats to you.
Thank you.